from Watercolor-Style Inky Abstract and Sketchy single line flowers to comparing silver shimmer, it's all about embellish and shine in this week's mixed media fun video. Before I get started with the Watercolor-Style Inky flower embellishments, I decided to show you another tool that is really handy to have in a mixed media studio. It's narrow, so it's easy to store, but for larger papers, this opens up. This sheet of heavy watercolor paper is 12 inches wide, and I decided I'd cut it in half for the demonstration of the embellishments. You can use like stickers because we have lots more to get to with our sparkly shine. Links to this and other material used will be in this video's material post linked in the description. My Watercolor-Style Inky abstract flowers can be quick and easy to make, but it's also fascinating to watch the ink flow through the water. I start by using a soft watercolor brush to lay down some random blobs of clean water. Nothing with any clearly defined shape. My acrylic inks are Liquitex Professional Deep Violet and an Amsterdam I bought on clearance in Azo Yellow Deep, which, yes, I do have on my fingers from shaking it, not realizing the top wasn't totally on. Next is to place a tiny bit of ink in each watercolor blob. I don't even want an entire drip. Just touch the tip to the water and watch it flow. That wasn't touching the other water, so it didn't really flow. This is another project that is totally unpredictable, and you can't control the final outcome. I talk a lot about that in my Better with Art videos, which have moved to their new home on the Better with Art channel, so I can separate this art from the art intended to encourage people to reclaim their creativity and practice creative self-care with low-cost, easy-to-obtain materials. If that sounds like something you need to encourage you to be making regular art, there will be a link in the description. I had wanted to add my Azo Yellow Deep, but I really liked how these turned out, so I wasn't sure if I wanted to do that as I had on the ones that I did before this video was filmed. That reminds me of an iris, one of my favorite types of irises, with those shades of purple and gold. I added a little more yellow. And then I also decided that I wanted to do something about the separate ink on the left. First, I decided to try the paintbrush to add a drop of water, but I'd gotten it a little too dry, and even when I squeezed it, it wasn't coming out. But I remembered my water brush pen, which was not the ideal solution. So I went with the other tool I'd remembered, the pipette. I next used the tip of a paintbrush handle to apply a smaller amount of ink. If you remember earlier, I was saying how I wanted to be careful not to get too much ink. But I really don't like how that has pooled, and I don't like that edge. And I know I said just to let things do what they do, but I did not leave this well enough alone. And although I think the bottom petals would have turned out well, that top, yeah, I wasn't too sure about that. So I interfered. But it still didn't want to blend through that area, so I figured it was too dry. So I added water with the pipette and proceeded to what could perhaps be seen as overworked this potential flower. That's a lot of ink in there. So yes, quick and easy for the most part. I recommend that you don't play with it too much, typically. Here's the part that takes the most time, setting it aside to dry. But through the magic of YouTube, I can jump ahead to what I did next with this before showing you what I did while it dried. The next step is to use a pen and give some form to the flower images I see. They're really cool as they are, but to make them into something that can be used in a sticker, They need a little more definition. They need to be a little less abstract. And then they need to be cut out. On the other half of my watercolor sheet, I am going to start with my favorite black Sharpie and just draw some continuous line sketchy flowers. No rules, just have fun with it. I didn't use a Sharpie previously for these. I used smaller tip pens. The smaller the tip, the more delicate the flower, of course. The smaller the sticker can be. I just really enjoy making continuous line flowers. My favorite scissors complete the look. All you do is cut them out and voila. To start the shiny portion of this video, I got out a gel plate to use as my palette. In the past, you may have seen me use two different ways to apply paint through a stencil. One being the palette knife, and the other being a paintbrush with rigid bristles as opposed to soft. This particular brush is actually designed for use with stencil. I was originally going to use white paint for the stencils, but I figured since we were doing shiny stuff, might as well compare. I'm going to start with applying it the thicker coat. And because I don't want to make a mess, and because I want to limit the risk of making a mess on the rest of my paper, I'm going to not just use paper to cover it, but some delicate surface tape that will also keep my stencil from shifting. I'm using Liquitex Basics Silver. And spreading the paint. Yes, I did get far too little. And I should probably have grabbed my larger tube of silver, but I do want to use the little ones up also. And unfortunately, I was just doing that not very well. Oh, dang. I was just going to say I was lifting up the stencil a little bit and then proceeded to put my palette knife right under and through the stencil. So yes, when spreading it, you will need paint on the back of your palette knife. Oh, guess what? I didn't put down paper. Oh my word. I was just trying to get this little spot here I can see. I seem to be a bit of a train wreck this morning. It happens. Another tool a mixed media studio should not be without: shop towels, masking tapes, as I've already illustrated. So despite taping it down, perhaps I should have taped down all the sides. I was clumsy enough to get paint under almost all of the edges. So I don't have nice clean edges. It looks interesting, but far from ideal. And especially given how clumsy I'm being this morning, I should probably let that totally dry before I do the other style of stenciling. I will also go rinse my stencil because not all of it was pulled off on the plate. Spread this out. I won't pull this yet, but this will, whatever else I add, will have an interesting silver sheen over it with some botanical shapes from the stencil. Acrylic paint and stencil attempt number 1 is dry, and I have a lot of extra colors on my gel plate because of poor planning while working on a Better with Art video. A happier accident than excess paint from a tiny tube. My goal is to better keep the stencil in place than I did last time, since tape didn't really accomplish much besides keeping me from sliding. Well, I forgot I did get paint from the palette knife on my gel print, but not while I was using it the way it's supposed to be used. Unfortunately, I'm also off to a less than auspicious start with this style of stenciling because I started out with too much paint on my brush, and yeah, I'm again improperly applying it, and there's just too much of it, and I shifted the stencil. I do not make my videos in such a way that I keep trying for a perfect result to share. I fully admit that things do not always work. Even things that seem simple do not always go the way I want them to. And I believe we can learn from each other's mistakes or oopsies or imperfections or however you want to look at it, as much as we can learn from what, I started to say from what works, but both of these methods work. I just didn't do a very good job at them today. And besides offloading extra paint to the gel plate, I was wondering what else I could do with the still extra paint, as well as the excess paint I had accidentally squeezed out onto the gel plate to use. And as you can see, I still have quite a bit of paint in my brush. There wasn't enough paint on the stencil to make a great impression here, but I'm not done. That tone sounded negative. I'm not negative. It's great to keep experimenting, and I did not get too much paint on my brush this time. And I'm not wheeling the stencil. I may actually, this time, be giving a better example of how using a stencil with acrylic paint should work. Surprise! Oh, it's been a long day. It might not be the best time to do a voiceover for you. Using the brush this way will give you a more textured effect, which you may or may not like, but this did come out the way the stencil is designed, the way I was using the brush. There's a prime example of how I think with my fingers. Still lots of paint on here. I should have chosen a darker background for this because yes, as you can see, I am still not done and I am happily experimenting. I used a brayer on the back of the stencil to try to get as much paint off on my gel print as possible. And it's there, but it's not very visible, especially if you don't wiggle the paper around. I decided I wanted to try to work with the negative space of this one a little more and started adding silver. But again, there isn't enough contrast. In my referring to I should have chosen a darker gel print, there isn't enough contrast between the silver and the background. One of my favorite ways to use as much paint as possible for no waste is to roll my paintbrushes onto an art piece or collage paper. It does create a really interesting effect, which would be cool if you could see it. This is really interesting looking, but it doesn't have enough pop to really make a difference. However, one of my other metallic acrylic paints is iridescent graphite. And here's a taste of me working with the negative space, sort of blending it out away from the edges. I did switch to a narrower brush to get a better handle on, to make it easier to work with the finer details. That brush did have a much shorter handle as well as a finer tip. I have not yet completed this, but you get an idea of how it works. Next for shiny demonstration is Deco Foil. And there are two options for application of this also. Royal Davies recommended the PBO, and this has the fine tip, so you can freehand And I'll also be using Deco Foil's transfer gel, which can be used with heat or no heat. I'm clearly doing no heat. And this I'll apply with a stencil also. Part of my issue is I'm always afraid of wasting things. So I have a tendency to end up scraping things more and ending up with a not smooth surface when it's textural, when it's dimensional like this. I do see I have been letting my stencil rise between swipes, which we'll see. And I probably should have covered more of my paper. Not bad. And I will clean these. I do see a thin area after I noticed a little notch there, but those things that can be perceived as flaws can also add character. Now I'll freehand a little flower for comparison. So what I had originally used this for was edging, and I think that might be more ideal. No, I hadn't intended to fill in the petals, but yes, this is not going ideally. It does allow you a nice thin line, but all these bumps will end up very visible, so I'm not too sure on that. So as I said, using this to line edges may be a better use. So the watercolor-style inky flowers take a significant amount of time to dry. The silver paint takes time to dry, and this takes a lot of time to dry, maybe the most. But it needs to be totally dry before the next step. And again, by the magic of YouTube, I'm back with a section of video that I wasn't narrating as I went with my Deco Foil. Sticking with the silver theme. Actually, I had chosen the silver Deco Foil before I chose the silver paint. Regardless, you take your film with the shiny side up and rub it firmly on the adhesive. As mentioned, this works when the adhesive is fully dry. It will go from, as you saw, opaque white to translucent. The foil is decently sturdy, and I like to use my finger so I can feel all of the bumps and edges to make sure I am getting my shiny fully adhered. So this is straight up real time for you. I'm not speeding things up. I'm not cutting anything out, so you have a clear idea of how this actually worked. And take a look at that shine. Deco Foil is pretty impressive. You definitely get something very different from just using paint. Now, you might not always want something this shiny. Here is the little flower for comparison. I wasn't going to bother because I didn't like how it looked. However, it does give you an idea of how fine you can go down to if you are better at freehanding or edging than I am. This is how your foil looks after you use it. So it is reusable up to a point. Here's the opposite side, the side you put down on your paper. Creepy reflection, but it's a cool shirt. And if you're interested in one of my Have You Taken an Art Break Better with Art sweatshirts, they are available in my fourth wall shop. Deco Foil is really cool and rather easy to use. For me, better with a stencil. And here is our recap. Deco Foil, Liquitex Basics acrylic paint in silver. Third time was the charm with the stencil. Playing with negative space with iridescent graphite. Watercolor-Style Inky flowers. If you found value in this video, please give me a like and let me know your favorite in the comments. Be sure to subscribe if you haven't. I do love what the Azo Yellow Deep added to my purples, and some off-camera Othello blue-green shade and red shade snuck into the video. Last but not least, Sketchy single-line drawing flowers. I may have given up on 100 days of mixed media fun, but I didn't give up on mixed media fun videos.